update you on our top story of the hour. Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump is calling to temporarily ban Muslims from entering the United States.
A statement released by his campaign says, quote, Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what is going on. Well, CBS News senior political editor Steve Chaggaris is here with us now from Washington to break this all down. Steve, what do you make of Donald Trump's comments here? This is, I think, to put this into context for people, I mean, this is a country that was founded on people fleeing religious persecution. What do you make of his comment?
I mean, if we're talking about Donald Trump, who has spent literally the last several months making very controversial comments about immigration, about national security. So, I mean, President Obama last night in his Oval Office address specifically talked about Republicans who are making these kinds of comments about Muslims. That kind of warning obviously is not going to stop Donald Trump. Donald Trump is speaking to a narrower audience than I think a lot of folks are giving him credit for. He's speaking to the Republican electorate. He's running for the Republican nomination for president. And we're at a time where we're seeing Americans' fears or concerns about terrorism happening in this country rise. We're seeing polls show that the president's strategy to deal with this are going down. And people like Donald Trump and others in the Republican Party are using these kinds of statements to really try to sell an aggressive strategy to deal with terrorism and national security.
We've been putting up some tweets and different statements from other candidates running for president. This is Bernie Sanders' statement right now. The U.S. is a strong nation when we stand together. But we saw some of the other tweets coming in from other Republican candidates, even Jeb Bush saying he's become unhinged, his policy proposals not serious. You saw a number of tweets kind of coming out right now. Is this going to be hard for him to maybe walk back if it backfires?
I'm not sure he needs to walk it back. I mean, again, we've been talking about controversial comments that Donald Trump has made since he announced his candidacy in June, and he's walked back almost none of them. I mean, he's leading in almost every single poll that has come out since he's announced. This is part of his appeal, it seems, to a significant number of Republican voters. And so, again, at a time when national security concerns are rising among the electorate, he's rolling the dice and suggesting that a really aggressive way to deal with it is the path forward. Now, you're hearing people like Jeb Bush and Lindsey Graham and others criticizing Trump and Ted Cruz and others in their own party, suggesting that this probably isn't the best way to do it. These bombastic comments and strategies aren't the way to go. Now, that's going to be the question that we'll find answered in Iowa and New Hampshire in 60 days or so when Republicans go to vote. Do they want a candidate or a nominee who is going to make these aggressive statements and have a real aggressive strategy to deal with this? Or do they want somebody who may have an aggressive strategy but is talking in more measured tones about this? We'll see. Right now, the polling shows that people like Donald Trump that is what the electorate wants, and people like Jeb Bush, who's at 4% in some recent polls, and Lindsey Graham, who's barely registering, they're not.
Steve, it's interesting, as you pointed out, that the president yesterday asked for tolerance for Muslim Americans, and now we've got this new policy that Donald Trump is announcing here. I think the question that a lot of people are going to have is, in an era where the Republican Party has said for quite some time now, in fact, that they want to be more inclusive, they don't want to be seen as the party of old white men. Are we expecting that the Republican Party not embrace this policy from Donald Trump, but that they are not going to criticize it? We've seen some Republicans like John Kasich criticizing it, but the party as a whole, do we expect to hear anything from them about this?
Well, we haven't heard much from them on all the other controversial comments, and it's really interesting because you've got to wonder if there's just a hope that Trump doesn't become the nominee, or somebody like Trump who makes these kinds of comments. Because you're right, this is exactly what the head of the RNC warned about after Mitt Romney's loss in 2012, and they try to turn the party to more inclusive, to basically have candidates use more inclusive language to appeal to a broader part of the electorate. And if Donald Trump becomes the nominee, it's going to be interesting to see how he can pivot to doing that in a general election with all the comments that he's made and all the proposals that that he's made over the last 6 months. So we'll see. I think that there's a hope, at least among the establishment, that somebody who is talking in more measured tones about this stuff is going to wind up emerging in the next couple of months before Iowa, New Hampshire, or even some of the later primaries, and wind up getting the nomination instead of somebody like Donald Trump or Ted Cruz.
Sorry, Steve, so we just threw up a statement there. Not a statement, but this is Donald Trump making some remarks at a rally in Iowa back in September. One student prefaced her question by saying, I consider Muslim Americans to be an asset to our country. And then she asked Trump if he would consider appointing a Muslim to a cabinet position if he were president. And he said, oh, absolutely. No problem with that. Would I consider putting a Muslim American in my cabinet? Absolutely no problem with that. So the question a lot of people are going to have, and we've been talking about this all day, Ted Cruz has been rising in the polls. Is this, these kind of bombastic statements, a lot of people, first of all, I mean, it's hard to know what's in his heart, but it almost seems as this is a reaction to what some of the poll numbers are looking like, perhaps what the president said yesterday that a lot of people might not have taken any comfort from. How do you read it?
Yeah, I'm not going to try to guess what his intentions are here. All I can tell you is this is a different landscape in December 7th than it was back in September in terms of the terrorism and national security issue. After Paris, after San Bernardino, it's a completely different game. And so, to see him, use different language today than he was using in September, perhaps it's because of the fact that there is a growing concern among Americans about homeland security and national security. And so that's probably what's going on here. Again, I don't want to ascribe any kind of intentions as to what Donald Trump's doing here, but that's what seems like what's happening
Well,
here.
it seems like that might be the theme, Steve. We just got in a statement from Ben Carson, who, recently Republican presidential hopeful, but has slipped in the polls a little bit here. I want to read. He thinks that everyone visiting the United States should register and be monitored while in the country. This came just moments ago after Donald Trump's statement. Do you think we're going to see maybe others pile on here?
Well, again, I think it all depends on who. I think there is a definite slice of the Republican Party that doesn't agree with these sort of very aggressive prescriptions for these issues. You're going to hear more like John Kasich and Jeb Bush and Lindsey Graham talk about a more moderate approach to dealing with this. But I wouldn't be surprised to hear people like Ted Cruz and Ben Carson and maybe Mike Huckabee and some of the other hardliners really come out, maybe not as far as Donald Trump, but definitely take a hard line on dealing with these issues.
Well, Steve, we know that Ben Carson has been on the decline of late, and it's interesting that he just released a statement, not as bombastic as Mr. Trump's, but the calling for the monitoring of people is also, I think, a lot of people would say beyond the pale. So what do you make behind the decline of Ben Carson? He's just announced a trip that he's going to take to Africa. He's going to Nigeria. That I can kind of see. It's the biggest, it's the most populous country in Africa. They have a serious terrorism threat. Zambia, though, and Kenya, I mean, what do you attribute to the decline in his numbers?
Well, I think it's pretty clear, and I think he's even basically admitted that his lack of foreign policy experience is hurting him. And again, as I said, the landscape has changed. This is becoming more of an election about national security and foreign policy, and it's pretty clear that Ben Carson doesn't have a real deep grasp of those issues. And so, and I think he feels that going to see this stuff firsthand. He was in Jordan recently, seeing Syrian refugees over there. I think he feels getting firsthand experience with that will help him not only learn more about this stuff, but will hopefully, in his mind, convince voters that he is getting a grasp of these issues.
I mean, it's one of the things, and we're starting to see the reaction on Twitter from not just the folks that are running for the presidency, but from just thousands of people are tweeting. This is breaking the internet right now. And a lot of people, I mean, from what we're seeing on social media, a lot of people are really wondering at what has happened to this race for the presidency. I mean, that we've gotten to the point right now where certainly there are people, and it is a moment that we need to be very cognizant of, that there is the rise in terrorism, not just here in the United States, but around the world, but that we would get to the point where we would have a presidential candidate calling for essentially barring people because of their religious beliefs. And we're talking about 1 billion people. It's not just people from Syria and Iraq that are Muslims. You've got people from Scandinavia and from France and from, the former Soviet Union and from Indonesia and Malaysia. I mean, I wonder sometimes if people understand the scope of what he's actually calling for.
Well, and I wonder how many of those people who are tweeting at Donald Trump are actually going to take part in the Iowa caucuses or New Hampshire primary, right? And so the question is really on the plate of the Republican voters. Do they think this is a step too far, or do they not? And ultimately it's how the process works. And if Republicans are fine with what he's saying and he winds up winning the nomination, then that's something as a country we'll have to deal with Trump as the nominee of the Republican Party. But until then, this is really, the reactions of the average American almost don't matter at this point. He's running for a specific party nomination, and it's really going to be up to those voters to decide whether Donald Trump has gone too far or not.
But even if he wins the Republican nomination, what then strategy-wise does this do running for president against a Democratic hopeful?
In the general, what are the numbers showing there? Yeah.
That's exactly what the chairman of the Republican Party warned after the 2012 election, which was you can't put yourself in a position where you've gone so far to one side or alienated so many people where then you can't pull yourself back to the middle and be able to win in a general election. And so the question for Donald Trump is, as he goes further and further hard line on this stuff, is he gone too far to be a viable general election candidate? And we'll see. I mean, I can tell you based on some of the national polling now, and again, it's a year out from the election, the general election, but he's having trouble among independents and among Democrats in terms of favorability. So it's one of those things where if he gets the nomination, he's got a lot of work to do to convince Americans that he can be president.
And to Jamie's point, Steve, I mean, if Donald Trump were to be the Republican nominee for president of the United States, are we looking at potentially a Barry Goldwater moment? In other words, a complete dismantling and retooling of the GOP as we know it today?
There's just no way to predict. Who knows what the landscape's going to be next summer, next fall? Is it still going to be an election about foreign policy and national security? Is the economy going to collapse between now and then? You just never know. Who's going to be the nominee for the Democratic Party? Is it going to be Hillary Clinton, or is something going to happen to her where she doesn't become the nominee? It's really too early to predict that, and really too early to predict what American sentiment is going to be next year.
Oh, but isn't it interesting to speculate, I think.
Always fun to try to guess, right?
Senior political editor Steve Chaggaris, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shaggy.
Thank you, Vlad.
That's just
Love the
fun
tie.
times.
Man,
Good stuff.
It's crazy.
It's always fun. I think the crazy makes it fun.
Yeah, right, for sure. Until people start beating up Sikhs.
I'm from Minnesota. It's all fun until Jesse Ventura is the governor of your state, or Donald Trump is. Yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
He might be vice president if Trump is the nominee.
Trust me. That's.
Anyway, thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.